Hello everyone, I'm Sam Fritz, the Director of EdTech and AI at Solution Tree, and I'm excited to be moderating this new podcast series called From Foundation to Future, PLCs and AI in Education. This series is recorded live on site at one of our PLC institutes to give you fresh ideas, authentic voices, and inspiration for educators at every stage of their journey. So join me as I talk with keynoters, presenters, and attendees to learn from their successes and their challenges. Dr. Luis Cruz.
Thank you so Luis. Much I'm good.
For spending time with me. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate you.
30 years as an educator. Both, you've been an elementary, middle, and high school teacher and administrator.
I cannot believe it's been that long, but yes. And I've had the pleasure of working at the elementary, middle, and high. Most of my teaching happened at the elementary level. And then I would spend some time working with middle school and high school age kids, teaching them in the summers and what have you. And then I became an administrator at all three levels.
And not to mention too that you're a best-selling author as well. So we don't want to discount that.
Well, I'm honored, but when you write a book with Anthony Muhammad, you're going to become a best-selling author. So I'm honored and humbled that I got a chance to work with my mentor and very good friend, Anthony.
Well, I really appreciate you spending time with me today. We're here live at Seattle PLC Institute.
That's right, yeah.
And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, it's exciting to be here. I mean, these events there's an energy to them. Would you agree? I mean,
Yeah. No, I'm probably going to say this is my thousands, my number 1,000 when it comes to PLC Institutes. And there is an energy that you walk away with at the end of this experience, both as a teacher of this work and as a recipient of this work. So you're right.
You wouldn't keep doing this if you didn't get something from it. So do you get does it feed you too to come to these?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that here we are talking about professional learning communities. And I got to be honest with you, I learn from the audience what they're experiencing, what their challenges are. And sometimes we even get to learn how some of these teams are taking on that challenge. So then we can share with other teams how a school in Washington or a school in Charlotte, North Carolina, or a school in Los Angeles, California, figured out the same challenge another team might be experiencing. So it gets to be a learning experience for us too.
Yeah. All over the country, people are experiencing the same types of things, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are certain narratives that are continuously repeated.
Yeah.
Because the work is the work.
Right.
And the students are students that exist not just in one sort of capacity in one city. There's some similarities as well as differences, but by learning from those educators that are successfully tackling these challenges, we can share what we've heard other teams are doing with teams experiencing the same challenges.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Do you remember coming to these? We talked about this a little bit. Do you remember coming to them as a teacher?
I remember my first one. I remember my first one. It was in Newport Beach, California.
Okay.
And Jeff Jones, our CEO at the time, and he would open up the conference, and it was great. And then that was the first time I saw the amazing Ricardo de Cuatro, Rick de Four, speak, and I was hooked right away because here's what I appreciated. They weren't trying to sell me anything.
Yeah.
It was, these are the dynamics that you have at your school. Let us show you how to use what's already there and use both human capital and social capital to produce results.
Yeah.
And so I appreciated that about the conference.
Yeah, I remember, we talked about just briefly, but I remember I don't remember exactly where it was, now you say that. But my first event, I was a small group of a large school. And there was something amazing about being nervous about walking into this experience and then sitting down with hundreds of other educators from all over the country with the same problems I had and the same situation I was in. And that was life-changing for me to be a part of that.
Yeah, so here's the thing, right, is that I've started saying when people ask us what we do for a living, I've literally started saying we are professional educators. Not amateurs. And professionals never stop learning.
Right.
So to come to a conference like this with people from around the country who are experiencing similar challenges, it's incredibly stimulating to be able to really, really, really sort of experience that energy, right? Because then you start figuring it out, you're not alone. And there's other people that are experiencing the same challenges. And what if we do something revolutionary called come together and figure it out together, right? So it's pretty amazing, pretty powerful.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, folks that are here in Seattle or at any event. You already said you learned from them, so they're going to learn some things from you.
Yeah.
You had a great message this morning. One of my favorite things that you talk about is initialisms. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
What's an initialism?
Well, some people know it as acronyms, right? So I often say we are the profession of acronyms, meaning we got an acronym, an initialism for everything. But the question then becomes, how do we make sure these acronyms tie together, right? So PLC, RTI, GNV, Guaranteed and Viable Curriculum, CSA, CFAs. I think that Michael Ventura is someone I've never met, but one of the things that I read he posted on some kind of online chatterbox or something, he said something along the lines of that when we have information only, it's like a bunch of dots in the air that don't connect. Yeah. So what we need to do to create knowledge rather than just information is connect the dots for people. Right. So people need to understand the relationship between PLC, PLT, GNV, CSA, CFAs, and how that produces RTI. Right. And there lies the challenge. Yeah. So I think it's about knowing and learning how all of these things come together, and that allows us to be able to move forward, right? So
yeah, and they're not learning just that from you. That's kind of the message of the event, right? It's learning how to connect the dots.
The best compliment that I've ever heard is that even though each one of the teachers who do this work have different ways and styles of teaching this work, they're hearing similar messages. Yeah. So you're not going to hear someone else define high levels of learning differently. Right. You're not going to hear us not talk about the importance of a guiding coalition. So there are some very similar narratives across all the teachers at this institute, but then we have our own unique way of presenting it, right? Yeah. So Rick DeFore used to always refer to them as the non-negotiables. So we're going to talk about the non-negotiables, but within each of the non-negotiables, there's some things that we can be loose on. And so earlier today, I did a presentation on how emergent bilinguals learn at high levels and the tweaks we have to make to the PLC process. Not complete changes, just tweaks so that kids learning English as an additional language can benefit from our collective work together.
Yeah, so I'm going to come back to that in just a second. You say that in a very unique way that was life-changing for me, but I want to come back to that in a second.
Yeah, sure.
So one of the things we talked about too is the idea that a lot of times people will say doing PLC, I'm doing RTI, right? Yeah. And they think of it as this flat, it has 4 steps or it's got but what you're talking about is that it's 3D. We talked about that, where it's below the surface are all these interconnected parts, right? So it's not just, that's why we call it a process or a framework, right? We just still say do PLC. There's a PLC process or there's a PLC framework, right? Because it's deeper than just that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there lies in the challenge, right? Is understanding, I often describe it as PLC the noun versus PLC the verb. The school is the PLC. When a school becomes a PLC, they successfully begin to redesign a system never created for today's world, never created for today's definition of all, in places where they still value the word equity. It's how we create a more equitable learning environment. Right. It's not a woke word. It just means we acknowledge that kids are different. And in order for all of them to learn at the levels needed, we're going to have to make sure that we understand the difference between equal and equitable. So those connections are the ones that many hardworking practitioners can't make because they're in the midst of that school year and it's go, 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 go. When you come to a conference like this, you can press pause for a minute, listen in to see how everything connects so that when we return back to our school site, it makes more sense. Yeah. and now we can proceed in a more effective manner.
I used to think of it as innovating inside the box. I've heard that phrase
Yeah,
before
absolutely,
where
yeah.
we're defining for you sort of the pillars, the keys.
Yeah.
But with inside of it, you can hear from everybody, all different kinds of teachers and administrators that have different ideas of how to implement that same
Yeah,
basic framework, right?
right. Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree.
So let me come back to the emerging bilingual learners
Yeah.
or emerging bilingual students.
Yeah. Or
Or
multilingual students.
Yeah, I love that. Talk a little bit about that. What that mindset was changing for me to say they're not English language learners, they're emerging bilingual
Yeah.
students.
Here's the thing. Our system has done a disservice when it comes to that acronym. ELL has been perceived in many schools as a deficit
Yeah,
rather than an asset.
right.
So I got to give a shout out to the state of Texas, because in Texas they made it a state law that these children not be referred to as English language learners and instead be referred to as emergent bilinguals. I think the rest of the nation should follow suit. We know, and it doesn't take rocket science to figure this out, that in today's world, with a very, very robust global economy, the ability to communicate in more than one language is an asset, not a deficit.
Right.
Yet in our system, these kids are perceived often as too big of a challenge, a deficit rather than an asset. So emergent bilingual, multilingual learner, learning English as an additional language is a different way of saying these kids are an asset. Now let's work our system so that they can discover their assetness and not be labeled a deficit when we know that these kids have the potential to walk out with a superpower called the ability to communicate in more than one language.
That was big for me, hearing you say that. I heard you say that in Las Vegas in like 2018, 2019. You say it a lot, so you probably don't remember that one.
It's personal for me.
But it was amazing to hear it. And it's just a mindset change.
See,
and how you approach the student.
That mindset change then opens up the possibility of actions aligned with that mindset, right? So we want to make sure that in the end, we focus on the behaviors that are needed to move forward in an effective manner. So my good friend and mentor, Mike Matos, often reminds audiences that ideas don't help kids, actions do. But sometimes to be able to tap into the right actions, we have to have the right mindset going into that. And that will allow that transition to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that.
Absolutely.
Personal to me. But anyway,
absolutely.
Let's go on to a little bit more. We're kind of talking about it now, but it's a great transition. How do we get the most out of an event? If we're here on site, we go to an institute, how do I, as an attendee, get the most out of that?
I think what makes our event special, in addition to just being high quality learning for all participants, is the fact that those of us called presenters, I call them the teachers of this work.
Teacher of teachers.
Yes, exactly. Have all been in the shoes that our practitioners find themselves in. I sometimes joke that our leader, Jeff Jones, would not hire just someone who does theory to present at institutes. Because while theory definitely is important as a stepping stone to eventually doing this right work, this is a conference for practitioners, taught by practitioners. I would rather hear from someone who hasn't just theorized about this, but have actually learned by doing it. Hence the book, Learning by Doing, right? So the original architects of this work, Rick DeFore, Dr. Bob Aker, wanted to make sure that this was a conference for practitioners, taught by practitioners. So the way that you get bang for your buck is by listening to these practitioners break it down for you, building a guiding coalition, a assembly of teacher and administrative leaders who are going to do the most revolutionary thing that can be done, and that make this happen back at their school sites by creating a common language first, and then asking themselves, what aspect of what we learned do we need to begin with? So there isn't one formula to make this happen at your school. Every school is different. Every school has different personalities. Every school has different diverse student bodies. But what you learned here by practitioners who have already done it now needs to be replicated at your site. And that's the magic of our conference, that through the work of a guiding coalition, it gets done in very unique ways around the country, around the world. But we know it's going to work because the practitioners who made it happen are now sharing with you all the steps that need to happen for you to consider to make it happen at your site.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, let's think about it. Let's go back to the version of me that came with my 6 people, and our district wasn't ready yet to go all in on this. And we didn't have the right, maybe the right people here to make that decision happen. I was one of those nerdy teachers where the reward for like doing extra work and being on committees was you can go to a conference. And I was like, yay, right? So then to take that home back with me, what do I do if I'm in that situation where I don't have the decision-making ability or I don't have the influence in my building to take what I learned and apply it? I could do it in my own room, right? I can apply it to my own teaching. But what else could I do if I go back to my school?
Well, that's why you often would hear Rick DeFore say, we have to begin by creating a guiding coalition. Now, they specifically chose that set of words to distinguish between a traditional leadership team. Because in our profession, traditional leadership teams have been managers of a building that do not really focus on the learning that should be happening. So a guiding coalition needs to be assembled, right? I often say that the number one pronoun at this conference is we, not I. So you need to go back and begin to tap into the people that you know at your school site can create a powerful collective force if we join forces together. And these people exist at every school. I've never been to a school where there isn't at least a small team of people who literally want to increase learning for all kids. So leadership can no longer be synonymous with only admin. It's got to include teacher leaders in the form of a guiding coalition. And Bill Hall, one of our wonderful associates, writes a great book called Powerful Guiding Coalitions. I'm looking at it right now. And then Dr. Muhammad and I contributed to the work of leaders by talking about how they take action. So we want to make sure that everyone understands that it's time for change, which is the title of our book. Here's how you handle resistance to this work. And here's how we make what we hear at this conference and learn at this conference happen back at our school site.
That's tough, right? That's a tough, I mean, but it's the right work.
If it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah, I think, I often think that sometimes with change, that knowing it's right to change makes you ask the question, how much longer can I tolerate doing what's bad for kids when I know what I have to do to make it good for kids?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, look, I often joke that the hardest part about this work is not going to be the kids. It's going to be the adults. And we're not talking about lazy adults who don't care. We're talking about hardworking adults who love kids and work hard. Right. But let's be real. We've inherited an educational system that is not the one we need, and we rarely go into the profession knowing that. Right. And number two, we've been conditioned to believe that the way we experience school is the way these children should experience schools. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that over time, we begin to grasp an understanding that our educational system as we inherited was never created for the kids we have today. So that's the kind of work that is going to have to happen, which is why it's challenging. Yeah. So kids, I've never seen a school where kids are, picketing outside, no to PLCs. Right. But if done without giving it some thought, I've seen adults react that way. And that's just creates a challenge for kids learning.
I also think there's a little bit of, you have to give yourself permission as a teacher to recognize that I didn't intentionally do it poorly or wrong or badly.
That's right.
I was doing the best I could with what I had and what I knew. And now all of a sudden I know better and I got to it's okay to make a change.
Maya Angelou's words resonate. Now that we know better, we got to do better. And here's the great thing. The PLC process allows there to be resets along the way. You know what we should do is we should give every team that leaves here a PLC reset button, because they're going to try something. It's not going to be perfect. Hit the reset button. Let's try it again. And all those resets will eventually add up to doing the work the right way. So one day before I retire, many, many years from now, I'm going to write a book called All the Mistakes We Made on Our PLC Journey, because the only way that we get better is by learning from our mistakes. So, yeah.
Yeah, Regina Owens said this in one of our earlier podcast episodes about keep it simple, follow the process, or follow the playbook. Like when you get in, you get in the weeds and it gets hard, that's kind of the mantra.
Dr. Owens is very bright and very articulate. So here's the thing. Follow the script. That's why the learning by doing was written. But when that script doesn't produce the results you need, because maybe you need to make some tweaks, hit the reset button and give it another shot. The only way you mess this work up is you do nothing. You're going to go back and go forward. Some of us are going to go back and fix some things. Some of us left, some of us right. The only way you screw up is you don't do anything. So mistakes are part of the experience. Learning from them is what allows us to be successful. Learning by doing. So, yeah.
Right. Okay, last thing I want to talk about
Sure.
is you mentioned this briefly. We talked about it before, about human capital, investment in human capital.
Yeah.
So coming to an event is an investment in the human capital.
Yeah.
Best way to affect your student outcomes is your teacher in the classroom, right? So why is this event, why are events in general, why is it important to invest in the teacher capital, the human capital of your district?
Because let's be real, our teaching credential programs got us started, but they didn't give us in my culture, we say the whole enchilada. So I would like to think that cardiologists that graduated back in 1994 never stopped sharpening their saw to echo the words of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Covey Institute, right? Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So this is about continuously sharpening our saw. We are not amateur educators. We are professionals. Professionals never stop learning. Professionals are continuously seeking the latest practice based on research, a preponderance of it, that we can implement back at our school site. Schools do not exist in a vacuum. As society changes, we're going to have to keep in mind how those changes affect the way we do business in our schools. So let's make sure that we are continuously sharpening the saw so that we can prepare our kids to handle the fast-paced changing world that they're going to inherit, whether we like it or not. I think John Maxwell says it best, right? He says, change is inevitable, growth is optional. So if we want to grow, then we must invest in the human capital needed to keep up with a society that is changing at warp speed.
Luis, thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
time. I really appreciate the conversation.
Honored. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Since 1998, Solution Tree has worked to transform education worldwide by empowering educators to raise student achievement. In pursuit of that mission, the PLC at Work Institutes are designed to bring educators together for 2.5 days of shared learning and collaboration. With a brand new 4th keynote, updated content, and dynamic breakout sessions, you'll gain advanced tools to refine your approach and make a bigger impact. To learn more about the full slate of PLC at Work Institutes and to register, navigate to www.solutiontree.com/events-podcast.
I really appreciate you tuning into this episode in our Live from Seattle series. Make sure to navigate to solutiontree.com/podcast to listen to our other episodes, not just from Seattle, but our other live episodes as well. Subscribe today on your favorite app. Thanks again for joining me.